Hello everybody and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. Today we have a special edition of the show because we talk about continuous API management because there's a second edition out there and I am lucky enough to have all the authors here. So what we want to do today is just talk a little bit about the book, what changed since the first edition came out and what we did to update the first edition to what was now published as the second edition. Let's have a little round of introductions. Ronnie, you're up first, so how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing better now that I get a chance to be with all of you. It's a pleasure to see everyone again.
Thanks for being here. Mike, how are you doing?
Doing great, coming to you live from the forest in Kentucky. So I'm having a great time. And again, this is the first chance in a long time that we've all been together, Zoom together, whatever. And it's great to see you all.
I think actually the last time we were all together was when the first edition came out. I think this is the last time all of us met, at least in person.
I thought the last time we were together was when you tried to record this and you forgot to push record.
That is very funny, Ronnie.
There's an edit.
Okay, yes. Now, moving on. Last but not least, we also have Mehdi with us. Mehdi, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you very much. As I was saying, I was really glad to do the first edition with all of you. It was almost a dream of this remote French API guy working with you, and I was continuously enjoying it to do the second edition with you. So yeah, it was a pleasure, and let's talk about it.
Yeah, good choice of words there. So I thought one of the things we could do to just talk a little bit about where we're coming from and why we decided to put some time into writing the second edition would be to say, okay, what has changed since that first edition came out 3 years ago? So let's just talk a little bit about what changed in the API space in general and how that may then have affected us kind of revising the first edition. So Ronnie, what do you think has changed most importantly in the API space?
Biggest thing is a lot of big companies went from aspiration to implementation. You know, microservices took off. So a lot of what we wrote about years ago as, hey, there's a problem you might face. And now people might be picking this book up because, hey, I'm facing this problem. How am I going to get through this?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something I see as well. Mike, what do you think has changed?
Well, as I went through the material, you know, in the first edition, we kind of stayed away from technology and implementation details and focused on big picture items, you know, such as the pillars and teams and governance and landscapes. But really over the intervening years, I've seen a shift in the customers that I work with, spending a lot more time on event-driven architecture, more time on data-driven things like GraphQL. So mixing that in with the rest, I think one of the things that I've seen happen more in the last few years is expansion of the challenge space. We actually have more things to deal with now than we did 3 years ago, and I think that's reflected in the fact that the second edition is actually a thicker book than the first edition.
It is, yeah, you can tell. And I like the way how you put it, the expansion of the challenge space, and I think what you're also saying is that also the expansion of the solution space, right? So the diversity of API landscapes has become bigger, so it also is important that you understand what things you can design and why to choose one over the other. Mehdi, what do you think has changed mostly in the API space over the last 3 years?
So what I think has changed is that 3 years ago, companies were mostly APIs and had problems. Their main problems that they didn't have APIs or not enough. Now, 3 years later, they have APIs, so they have the problem of having APIs. So that's a different kind of problem, governance and the idea. So yeah, now they have the problem of the consequences of having APIs. So yes, the mindset is, let's say, junior people being affected as API product manager because every big company now has one or multi involved in APIs directly. So it's really there. And on the technical side, I would say we see a little bit more stabilization. 3 years ago, there was some hype on the GraphQL and other stuff like that. Async API were just like starting. So we see a little bit more stabilization. Now people know more than 3 years ago when they adopt REST style or event-driven style or GraphQL before 3 years ago they were following the hype sometimes. So yeah, we see a lot more steadiness in the practice. So kind of a plateau of productivity we finally reach.
I like how you said, 3 years ago they were not enough. And just recently, I had an interview with Isabelle Moni, and she said they're popping up like mushrooms left and right. It's really something where yes, we get more and more, and now the challenge more becomes like how do you manage that? And I think that kind of means that we really hit a good space with our book, right? Because that is all that the book is about. It's like how do you manage those landscapes and what are the things to look out for. And I also think that we, once again, so to speak, as with the other book that the API Academy wrote before that because there's not much specific technology and tools in there, right? It has a longer shelf life, which I think is a good thing. Okay, so I think we've seen that the API space has kind of matured. It has evolved a little bit, but it also has stabilized, but it also has become more visible and potentially a little bit more complex. And this is why I think we decided that it would be time to update the book, to reflect on what happened in the last 3 years. And I think it's also just the simple fact that after a little while, people think that books are outdated, regardless of whether they are or not. So coming up with a new one and getting this nice little color cover treatment was a good idea. Reflecting on what we changed on that, I think it would be interesting to just briefly, once again, go through all of us and talk about what we did change, so what readers can expect in that new edition. This time, let's start with Mike. So, Mike, what did you focus on when you were working on the second edition?
Right. So in my case, I focused a lot on user scenarios, use cases, examples. We had comments from readers that they wanted to see more real life examples or more sort of applied examples of the concepts we were talking about, because we talk about so many different processes and models and patterns that we'd seen in the industry. So definitely the book has more concrete examples peppered throughout, and they're updated too. In a few cases, we actually went back to the same companies that were in the first edition and asked them how things were going. So I think there's lots more in there that has to do with actual use case. And that was actually very exciting to be able to go back and talk to some of the same people 3 and sometimes 4 years later and see how they were doing. It was very rewarding.
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing that nowadays it's just easier to find organizations that do have some experience because, like we all said, right, we do see much more of this happening out there. So it's easier to kind of collect that experience and report in it. Mehdi, what did you focus on for this new edition of the book?
Yes, for this new edition, my focus was more about giving some tooling or some advice about where to find tooling to apply stuff, to use our methodology or practices or direct tooling about how to apply the principles of especially the 10 pillars we talk about, or managing the maturity of APIs directly. So that was mainly giving some augment the edition with actionable elements that some people have claimed it was not enough in the first edition. So that's really what we, at least for my chapters, and I think we all did that on our part, we did for this edition.
Yeah, I think it's always the risk, right? Like making things more actionable is like, how will that age? But I think you're right that we did get some feedback that said, okay, I understand I have to do that, but how do I do it? And I think that's definitely a valuable addition. Ronnie, what did you focus on for that second edition?
Well, let me say, I think the first edition, I kind of like the map behind you, right? It was an initial exploration of a space that, like in scope, is massive. And to cover that much scope kind of requires you to just maybe draw the outline. Hey, we've explored these for you, these areas for you. We've seen these coves, these islands, so that people after us could come in and kind of find their place. In the years since we published the first edition till now, people have been exploring, right? They've been settling. There's towns and settlements popping up. So for me, I really focus on how do we, because I'm out in the field a lot more now than I was 4 years ago, right? For me, it was tying that map we had put together to what's actually happening now. So even in organizational design, we spoke about it a bit abstractly in the first, And in the second, we can tie it to things like team topologies as a, hey, go use this, where they're talking about something just like this, and you can actually apply it and learn about that and use it in your practice, right? So in a lot of ways, it's kind of like, I don't know, Asia or North America, those maps being developed over time. This is the second version of it, and hopefully it's more useful.
And I really like, I think one can tell when looking at the second edition of the book, in particular for your parts, Ronnie, I think is that you have been really out in the trenches, right? That you had to look at how do teams work, how are decision processes working, and so forth, right? And I think that reflects very well in the changes to the second edition. For myself, the one thing that I focused on mostly was this thing that Mike talked about initially, saying that the diversity of API landscapes has increased, right? So when we wrote the first edition, which, well, I guess when we wrote it, that was like 3.5 years ago, REST was still kind of the default choice, and GraphQL was kind of a little set of enthusiasts, and async API was only just getting started. And I think by now we have seen that it is important and it is relevant to look at the diversity of different API styles, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense to say this one is better or is the one correct style than the other. It's a design choice that you have to make. So what I focused on mostly was adding a chapter about API styles, talking about what these different styles do, just to add a little bit to this understanding that if you look at an API landscape, you might see that facet of diversity in there. And it's not necessarily the case that you should say, I'm only doing this, or only doing that, but that you understand what these choices actually mean, and that you can say, okay, we're doing these two styles, for example, because these seem to cover our problems in a good way. So I'm really happy that this one came out. It actually took a little bit longer than I was expecting it would take, but it's always very satisfying to see these things. The one thing that I'm a little sad about, of course, is that we won't have this satisfying moment where we all are together in front of this big stack of books signing them. But who knows?
Yeah, I'm gonna miss that. We're gonna have to engineer some way to get back together here when things continue to get safe. Because I miss you guys a lot. Just here, spending time here, it reminds me of how much fun we have when we get together. It was really great to see you.
Yes, I'm sure Mehdi will be more than happy to host us again at one of his events, right? So the API Days series is still going strong. And I guess as soon as it's safe to actually do these things in person again, we can arrange for doing that. Right, Mehdi?
Yes, and actually next year it will be the 10 years anniversary of API Days Paris. So for sure, we will find a way to gather all of us and being there, the four of us. So for people listening, that will be a great moment together with the whole community there.
Okay. Now, Mehdi,
and we will even get Ronnie there.
Are we going to be talking? Is this the end of talking about continuous APIs? Is there something coming up in Paris here?
At least we have an event like in a few weeks for this year, but where I hope we will be able to set up a full segment dedicated on continuous API management. But with the four of us, even respecting time zones, it will be hard, but we will manage it. Yeah, that will be a challenge, but it will be great to see each other in a physical manner next year also.
Yep.
But since we made this work with all of us being on this call at the same time, we just have to schedule the API Days event at the same time, and then it should work. I hope.
Be great.
Yeah.
For the quick story, the first API Days was around the venue of Ronnie and Mike and some experts. We made a conference around them. So let's do that 10 years, but around the four of us. Let's do that. Okay. Let's decide when we are all together. We make a conference around it.
Okay. Thanks so much, everybody, for being on this video. I really appreciated the time that we spent together. It was really nice. And well, if anybody wants to check out the book, right, so it's available now anywhere on your internet, I guess. Yes, everybody hold up their copy. And yes, we'll also, and by the way, I think there's still the free chapters available if you want to just check that out from the O'Reilly website. If so, I will link to them from the description. Okay. Thanks again, and
right.
see you soon, I hope, somewhere, and at the latest at the API Days Paris Trek, I guess.
Yep.
So, bye everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.